Sure, things are tough. The dust is terrible. The wheat is gone, the prospect for a row crop is diminishing, and all hell's broke loose, but we know what is back of this country. We know what it will do when it gets half a chance. We know that it will rain again, and the high plains will always bounce back like Antaeus of mythical fame, stronger after each fall. Grab a root and growl. Hang on, let's see how this all comes out. John L. McCarty, editor of the Dalhart Texan.
When John McCarty took over the Dalhart Texan in 1929, the great plow-up was still in full swing, and the future seemed unlimited. But 6 years later, many people in town were losing hope. My faith for the first time is being shaken in this country, the president of the local bank admitted. We need somebody to save us from ourselves. McCarty volunteered for the role. He was not going to let a little thing like a Great Depression or an unrelenting drought dim his ambitions. Having learned that advertisers preferred good news in the local paper, he happily provided it. Aside from wind and sandstorms, he assured his readers, there is really no disagreeable weather in the North Panhandle. And every time the slightest rain fell, he predicted the drought was finally ending. Even when Black Sunday buried the town in dust, McCarty was unbowed. Under a headline proclaiming, "Foreign dust proves panhandle irritant," he pointed out that the dirt causing all of Dalhart's problems had blown in from other states.
He said, this is God's greatest country, this is God's greatest earth. And then when the storm started coming, he kept up the same drumbeat. He spun, to use the term we use today, he spun dusters, the worst, calamity that the plains had ever seen, into a positive. He said, these dust storms are beautiful. I love these dust storms.
Let us pay a tribute to our sandstorms. Since we have them, let us recognize their true worth, their real beauty, and the dramatic power they exert as a force of nature. Let us proclaim with clarion bugle blasts heard round the world that we have here in the Panhandle a spectacle of nature that rolls more majestic than the mighty Niagara, that sweeps onward with a power far greater than the Father of the waters, and for its awful splendor exceeds anything short of the mighty oceans or the barren icy wastes of the polar regions. Let us praise nature and the powerful God that rules nature. Let us in stentorian tones boast of our terrific and mighty sandstorms, and of a people, a city, and a country that can meet the test of courage they afford and still smile. Smile, even though we may be choking and our throats and nostrils so laden with dust that we cannot give voice to our feelings.
To help God and nature along a little, McCarty decided to pass the hat and hire someone who could make it rain.
They'd do anything, religious or irreligious or whatever it took, if they could get it to rain. And the charlatans at that time would go around offering to make it rain for a price. $500, they'd come out and shoot up firecrackers, fire cannons in the air, blow whistles, and dance Indian dances, whatever. But we're definitely interested in anybody that could produce some drops of water.
Self-proclaimed rainmakers were doing a brisk business. In central Texas, one of them went up in an airplane and dropped what he called moisture bombs on the clouds below. But one of his explosives went off too early, setting the plane on fire and forcing an emergency landing. McCarty looked to someone else who promised to end the drought in Dalhart. For $300, Tex Thornton planned to send sticks of dynamite aloft and detonate them every 10 minutes. But high winds prevented him from getting his balloons into the air.
And rather than admit defeat, he decided that he would just bury the explosives and have one giant blast, and quite possibly it would have the same atmospheric effect. So he buried the explosives and set it off, and you have a giant explosion, which simply sent more dirt and dust over the onlookers, and everybody went home very much disappointed that this hadn't worked.
2 more days of noisy explosions were equally ineffective. But the night after his 4th attempt, a slight amount of precipitation fell. Thornton and McCarty, ignoring the fact that Denver, Albuquerque, and Kansas got even more rain that same day, claimed victory. "I'm mighty glad that the people of Dalhart and the Panhandle got moisture," Thornton said before picking up his money and quickly leaving town. "And if I had anything to do with it, I'm doubly glad." As the drought persisted, no one was more sensitive to the image of the Southern Plains than Dalhart's biggest booster, John L. McCarty. He hated the term Dust Bowl, fiercely opposed any proposals to encourage outward migration, and was increasingly convinced that Eastern reporters and opinion makers were creating an unfair stereotype of his region and its people. When a reporter for a national magazine wrote a long article entitled "Land Where Our Children Die," portraying the residents as uneducated yokels, McCarty responded with an angry editorial, "Thou shalt not bear false witness."
They were emphasizing the worst of the region. And what's more, they didn't have that faith in the future. They weren't people that could understand how you could stick and how you could wait for next year.
The rest of the nation has an image of the Dust Bowl as a defeated part of the country. People in the Dust Bowl area are really rather offended by all of this. They know times are hard, they know that it doesn't look good, but they're still there. They're still the same people that they always were. They're hardworking. They want the rest of the country to know that times may be hard, but they're not out. 75% of them stick it out. They really often deeply resent the national image of the Dust Bowl as a defeated land.
McCarty reserved his strongest ire for people from the region he thought contributed to the unfavorable public image. In his mind, they were traitors. Alexander Hogue was a painter who had grown up in Texas, and his stark portrayals of the land he thought had been so sorely misused began to get national attention, showing up in Life magazine, which gave him the title, The Artist of the Dust Bowl. But the West Texas Chamber of Commerce denied that Hogue's paintings were works of art, and the Texas House of Representatives voted to censor them. That wasn't enough for John McCarty.
They passed the hat to go and buy Alexander Hogue's painting because they wanted it gone. And the idea was they'd have enough money, they'd go back, they'd purchase the painting, then they'd bring it back and have a giant bonfire and burn the son of a bitch.
We'll buy up his paintings and burn them. Unfortunately, they only had $50 in their pocket, and the painting was worth $2,000.
But for McCarty, the worst insult came in the summer of 1936, when a new movie opened at Dalhart's Mission Theater. Directed by Per Lorentz, The Plow That Broke the Plains was a government-funded documentary film meant to describe the causes of the Dust Bowl and what Roosevelt's New Deal was doing about it.
It was a propaganda film, but it was brilliant. It was utterly brilliant.
The film placed much of the blame of the Dust Bowl on the arrival of the tractor to the Southern Plains, and described how sturdy farmers who had once slowly turned the soil behind a team of mules suddenly became a mechanized force arrayed against nature itself.
The reaction inside the Dust Bowl itself was largely not good. They didn't like seeing their land, them or themselves, as characters on the bad end of a drama.
But the film had already been previewed by the president and members of Congress in Washington and was showing in New York and other cities around the nation. All that attention enraged John McCarty. When more and more newsreel companies began showing up to make their own films, McCarty reached his limit.
The High Plains region is a helpless underdog, experiencing a vicious libel about which it can do nothing, because the libel has already been perpetuated. like a slanderous false whisper about a pure girl, like the rumor that starts a run on the bank, or the old myth about the great American desert. Take your movie cameras, your magazines, radios, and newspapers, and go to hell with them. All we ask of you now is to be let alone.
As more and more people began abandoning their farms, sometimes at the federal government's suggestion, McCarty fought back.
But in Dalhart, Texas, fighting the wholesale evacuation of towns, the Dust Bowl's now famed publisher John L. McCarty organizes a last man's club.
In states north of here, people are moving out by the thousands. Well, we're not quitting. Non-resident land is vicious land. Are we going to stay here till hell freezes over?
In a classic publicity stunt, he proclaimed the formation of the Last Man Club, to be comprised of people who promised to stick it out on the plains with McCarty until, as he put it, hell freezes over. Several hundred signed up. But in 1937, with the drought still gripping the southern plains, McCarty was offered a better job in Amarillo, and Dalhart's biggest booster left town for good.